When we go through the stars completely, the 12 zodiac signs, we uncover something. Everything is a reference back to the seed of the woman, to the Son of Man, to the Son of God. All of these are. There is no accidents, you can say, but again, some people will make the argument, these look like mythological figures, or these were maybe done in antiquity. But yeah, they were done in antiquity. This is the mystery of it all. That we in modern times can mess around with things and reorganize. We can Photoshop, we can edit, we can use AI and do all kinds of crazy things, but you can't alter the stars. In Genesis 1:14, and I made reference to this last week, God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years." So that really is very important. The word there, let them be for signs. And as I explained last week, a sign is usually representing something, can be a symbol. And I mentioned something like a musical note. You don't have to write that that musical note is C to look at the note and see where it is positioned in the lineup of all the different notes to say, well, that's C, and we know what middle C sounds like, but the symbol is that note. So we're looking at the same concept here, and we began looking at the explanation of the 12 zodiac signs and what appears with these signs to the north and the south. These representations we would refer to as the whole thing as a constellation. But the main star, for example, I was referencing Virgo, the Virgin, and to the north and the south, we have what appear around them, and I'll write it out for you. So this is what decans, to the north or the south. So I did bring some images. They're not the best. I'm going to try and work on bringing you better ones, but at least this will visual aids to help put this together and make sense. So last week, as I said, we covered Virgo the Virgin, which for the sake of this message, we've already covered, but it's unusual, okay, that when you start examining this, for example, what I covered last week under the decans of the coma. So let me first start by giving you the big picture, and you're going to please forgive me, it's the best I could do for today, and it's probably going to be very hard to see and make sense of. So, all right, here we have Virgo the Virgin, and I want you to take a look to this direction right here. We have coma, that is the mother and child image. We have butes. So these they actually belong along with the Virgin. So when I make reference to these things, what we're looking at is, again, it's kind of hard to see this, but the biggest dots, stars of the first magnitude, and as the stars get smaller, they are second, third, fourth. So what you're looking at are stars that have been connected, the dots have been connected to bring about these images. Now, I didn't create this map. In fact, these images are quite old, so I'm not asking you to look at these and try and think how you understand them or how they relate to the modern zodiac necessarily. I'm asking you to just look at them, and as I discuss, you can kind of relate to the images that we're looking at. So here is Virgo the Virgin. Here is a better kind of, I think, blown up version of her. And you can see the foot of butes right there. And let me get the other images that go along with this, because we'll be talking about a few of these. So you have Virgo the Virgin. You have coma, that is the mother and child. All right. Number 3 that I mentioned last week. So I'm going to do a couple of these, put them up here, and then I'm going to talk so you can be able to see back and forth of the images that we are discussing. This is Centaurus. And what's pretty important here, there are some, you're going to see other things in the images. This is the crux, the cross, and I'll be discussing that as well. You can see here Hydra, which is another serpent form we'll get to. Almost done here with these images. And here is, if you want to call him Butes or Boots. And you can see we have here like the coming one. That, as again, I said, this is images that I found. I'm not 100% sure that they're the best images, but that's what we have to work with right now. So, what I discussed last week, now that you have a visual under the decans of coma, that is mother and child. All right, and let's turn it this way so you don't have to be turning your head. All right, so mother and child. I have a weird sense of humor this morning. All right. We can see, for example, the Persians and Egyptians and most others knew this image to be Yesu, which, let me write this out phonetically for you, would look like this, kind of not too much of a stretch to see that the other way this was referred to looks like that, which we can see is not a far stretch to Yesu, this particularly right here. So the first decans in Virgo, the Virgin, is coma. Now in the Hebrew, this means desired or longed for. The term, the very term, was used by the prophet Haggai when he refers to the one who is the desire of all nations, to be desired, to be longed for. It's the same word. It's equally clear that the reference seed of the woman, which I was talking about out of both the Virgo, the Virgin, and coma, the seed of the woman, the only begotten Son of God, who we read in the scriptures, Emmanuel, the with us God. So when I say to you, we must investigate this image in a comparative way. And the reason is because somebody listening to you might say, but you're making a stretch here. How can you say that that would be representing Mary and Jesus? Because it doesn't say that there. No, everything around it does in a strange and alternate way. But when you start examining all of the cultures that have mother and child, you begin to see that if you're going to do that and you take all the mother and child concepts and then look at the story that is around them, there is only one person truly that it can fit to. I cannot make this fit, and I could take many of the different versions of mother and child, but just Osiris. I can't make it fit. It doesn't go, it does not correlate to all the other issues that surround that person. But if you told me biblically we're talking of the person of Christ, I'd say almost each one of these has some type of symbolic connection. We will study comparatively the mother and child through every culture and tradition so that I can show you why Jesus is different. And when I say different, not just different, but he fits in this category as the sole person that could fit this description. We'll get to that one when we advance into that study. So, all right. We also saw last week in the decans of Virgo, we encountered Centaurus, or the half man. Is he up here? Yeah. So half man, half horse. And again, remember, these are signs. They are not, don't think of them as exact. So I need to talk about this because everybody will say, well, that's out of mythology. Now, if you start down the pathway of investigating mythological beings that are represented, a lot of them, but specifically this particular figure, most people don't know that in the mythological tales that are spun around the centaur, these centaurs are supposedly born in heaven, sons of God, and usually are hated or abhorred by men. I don't know, that does kind of sound familiar, but what I pointed out is the half and half is representing the half. Jesus was all man and all God, but representing a dual nature, if you will. So this particular decans, I wouldn't say it's remarkable, but the cluster around it is pretty kind of interesting. So If you remember last week, I talked to you about this word from the Arabic, dikens, right? The pierced one, despised one, the value of this word. And finally, did I take Butes away? No, he's right there. All right. Then I'm going to bring back the bigger picture so we can look at everything that's in there. In this picture or image, you're seeing the coming one. And if you remember last week, I talked about Arabic scholarship, Jewish scholarship, Persian. All of these diverse peoples came up in antiquity with much of the nomenclature here. So don't go, Pastor, are you making this up? This is a very old subject with very old names attached. So Butes, the strong man, if you will, but his name comes from an Oriental root, bo or vo, which is the coming one. Bo or Bothes is the shepherd and guardian of what is now called the Great and Lesser Bears. The brightest star in this constellation of Bothes is also referred to as Arcturus or Arctos, a word of interest for us. Why? Because it is the star of ascension. See, this is my problem. You start reading this, you go, this is all very convenient because all the verbiage and everything that's been identified is all the verbiage that is attached to things that we study in the New Testament. So I don't know what you do with that. Somebody might say, well, what a coincidence. Yeah, okay, it's a coincidence. All right. All right. There is a star on the right side or arm of Butes, Al-Katurops, and that's a pretty relevant piece of information because Al-Katurops means the branch or the rod, often connected to the shepherd's staff or crook, a definite sign connoting some type of pastoral leadership. So before I move on, let me just take a few minutes and let me put the bigger picture up so we can go back to this and take a look at something. And got to put this in the right direction too, otherwise you'll all be with your head still to the side. All right, here we go. So we have here Virgo, the Virgin. You remember we talked about she has some wheat and perhaps corn in her hand. Now here, the depiction of her, she's upright, but most other images she is prostrate. She is laying down. And I'm not sure that she's face up or face down because there are several different images to this effect. Here is Butes, coma. We have the centaur. And we'll be talking today also about this cross, the crux, and the victim. We will possibly, hopefully, get to these images here and a little bit of Sagittarius, the pyre, and the lyra. So those are the things I want to look at and discuss today, introduce them. Okay, so let me go back for a second. The seed of the woman, that was to bruise the serpent's head. And remember, we talked about this last week, the figure or image of the woman with child, who is, if we're analyzing this right, he is the everlasting one. In his double nature, the rod, the branch, the seed, he is the chief shepherd of the flock, the pierced one, the despised one who was bruised for our iniquities. This is the gospel. And that is just an overview from just those few things. And this is a really fascinating study, and I tell you, if you're interested on the subject, you should start digging a bit. There's not a whole bunch of work out there, probably maybe about a dozen authors, and I hate to tell you, but they almost all regurgitate one another. No one's really made any original contribution. So I want to reflect on this just briefly. I mentioned this earlier, the mother and child symbolism, which will become an important part of this study. So I don't want you to think I just mentioned that and we just blew through it, because I want to spend time doing some comparisons across the board. So we'll just kind of skip over it. I've made mention of it. I want to move on to the symbol or the figure of Libra. So this is a little bit more challenging because this does not typically look like the image that we might be accustomed to. Kind of, you can see right here, Libra, but that is the image that we're looking at. And there's also a bar that goes through this, which has a specific name, which is translated the crossbar. But I think it's interesting that most times when we look at this image, it usually is balances, scales, all right? Almost in every ancient zodiac, specifically, for example, in Hebrew, mozaneim is the word, the scales or the act of weighing. In Arabic, al-zubina, meaning purchase or redemption. In Coptic, lambadia, the place of propitiation. I don't know how you can hear every word that I'm saying and not go, but this is straight out of the Bible. But these images, I just quoted Genesis. God put them in the sky for a sign before there was a Bible ever written. Now, if that doesn't confound some of us, because again, you can say, but those images are not necessarily images that represent Christianity. No, but they are signs and they are symbols. And if we're going to take what was in antiquity, this would be the clearest symbols, most recognizable for most people. So to me, it's very fascinating. Now, if you take, as I mentioned in the Coptic word lambadia, the place of propitiation, if you take the same words from Coptic, lam and badia. Lam, grace or graciousness, and badia is branch. The amazing, I don't know, again, how you get to this, I'm not sure. In the Greek, it's zugos, a piece of wood, the crossbar that I just pointed out. This piece of wood right here. Okay. The crossbar joining in this kind of the yoke, if you will. And the name of the star in Libra is Zumin al-Shimali, which is translated the price that covers. I don't know. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I'm even baffled by it, okay? And I don't get baffled by it too much, but I'm like, holy cow, okay. Is this just a coincidence on this one? No, it's everywhere. So that's why I'm saying to you, you have to pay attention. When you start seeing these patterns, you have to just scratch your head. Specifically, by the way, this is why I got so excited about mentioning to you that the Arabic scholar who really did the foundation of everything that we're talking about, although people had written many books and there were many treaties and special scientific programs on this subject, it was the man Abu Mashar in about 800s AD, and he is a Muslim. So okay. That's why I said to you, sometimes you just got to look at things, and somebody will say, you're reading into this, but it's not me. I never read into this. I just read it and I saw what I saw, and that's all you need to know. All right, so this sign, the sign of the scales, obviously is attached to divine adjudications involving payment and penalties. Now, let me go back a second to Virgo, the Virgin, and all that we saw regarding the seed of the woman, the child of the Virgin, the promise of the bruising of the head of the serpent. Then we are confronted with the eternal weight of judgment, weighing out what manner of reward or punishment should be issued. So in the sign, typically we have a pair of balances combined with the sufficiency of the price paid, the ransom of this one who could cover for all of humanity, for all of time, with his shed blood. And we read in the scriptures, thou art weighed in the balance. It should be a concept attached to this concept we're looking at in the zodiac. The idea of weighing out and measuring out justice. Each of these, the balance up and the balance down, the image is to carry this concept. The price paid sufficient to cover. The other one says there is a debt outstanding or not paid. So each is signified or signifying to be covered by him or to be exposed by him. Standing directly in the second decan of Virgo, the two-natured, double-natured seed of the woman connected to Libra by way of the redemption price. We're not looking at the zodiacs independent. They're all woven together. As you navigate the sky, you find out that connected to Virgo the Virgin is the price paid, and the price could only be paid through coma the mother and child, making it only the child, not the mother, all right? Just need to clarify that. That brings us to the crux or the cross we looked at right here. It's kind of interesting, if this does represent the duality of Christ, the double nature, right underneath it, the cross. You can see it right there, crux. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory. But what is interesting is that the cutting off point, if you will, in the zodiac of Dandara, which dates back to about 50 BC, crux is represented with a lion looking back at the symbol of the cross, which obviously is not in this image. And most people have taken that to be the Lion of Judah looking back at the cross. Now, as I said, I'm going to try and find you some different, I have some very old Arabic charts, which we might have some difficulty reading everything on the chart, but I think it'll be helpful. I have some other charts from some other backgrounds, so I think showing you this will give you clear insight that in all of these cultures, they weren't saying, we're reading the Old Testament and so we put this here. They were interpreting what they saw. Next, there is the slain victim. So the slain victim is right here, and this is a little tricky. Please do not go by some of these images. They are a ballpark. This is a terrible image right here because they identify this on this chart as lupus or victim, the wolf or the victim. However, most older charts have the victim as being a sheep or a lamb. I don't know what you do with that one either, but anyway, okay. I don't know, this is totally crazy. If you're reading this and you might say, there's the gospel. Does anybody not go, that's astounding. How did God know? Never mind. But he did, yes he did, all right. So, unless somebody really can wrap their mind around this gets interesting. So, remember Jesus said he would no man takes my life, I lay it down of myself. He still had to be sentenced to die at the hands of religious leaders. But what's interesting is he said, no man taketh my life, I lay it down of myself, and I will take it again. And why is that interesting? Because if you pay close attention to this, you've got the dual nature, and we'll call it now, I'm referring to our gospel as all man, all God. You've got the cross right underneath that. And if you're looking at this through the eyes of other charts that have it as sheep or lamb, which that's what I'm going to refer to it as, it almost presents the dual nature and the victim being the sheep. So all man, all God in symbolism, and the sheep or the lamb that must be the victim, that must pay the vicarious price for the whole world. So it's kind of one of those things you have to look at it carefully. And that's why I said, theologically speaking, it's important to understand he doesn't become his own. He says, no man taketh my life, I lay it down of myself. So if you look at this could be the complete picture, or at least one part of the complete picture of Christ, both in dual nature, by the cross, and also as victim, paying the ultimate price with his death. We also see, with this image, we see an innocent victim. Now, as I said, if you identify this with, this chart says wolf, you have a super issue, but I can tell you most identify, and most charts are labeled Surah, S-U-R-A, sheep or lamb. In the Coptic tradition, this victim is a young naked man, his finger on his mouth. To the Egyptians, this is Horus, the precious son of Osiris. That's why I said to you, it really does merit, if we were to take and study the life of the child Osiris, ask yourself if it could fit into any narrative there and make sense. It cannot. If you're going to follow this, what I'm doing, that's why I said the comparative study of mother and child becomes very important to say, is this a fit? It's almost like the fairy tale of Cinderella. The shoe must fit, right? Everything has to match up. If it doesn't, you can't, it's almost like forcing it. Everything lines up to the gospel in signs and symbols. I also recognize that this, if you take a look at the victim is kind of already on its back. The arrow or whatever is about to be plunged into the chest. And I think we don't have any sense, specifically with this image, we have a tongue sticking out. I don't know what that means, but but I do think that if you were looking at the sheep or the lamb image, you could definitely look at that image and say, yes, just like what Isaiah 53:7 says, oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. That's why I made the comment about the tongue. But he is brought as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before the shearers is dumb, so he opened not his mouth. And that's why the image of sheep or lamb is much better than the image that is placed here of a wolf. All right, the Southern Cross is connected to the Northern Crown. Southern Cross and the Northern Crown, Corona Borealis, not Corona 19. All right. Never mind. Because that wasn't written in the stars by God, let me tell you, okay? Let me tell you something, all right? So, the third decans of Libra is the Corona Borealis, and that rises just to the east in the northern part of Botes. So if you look really carefully here, there is the crown, right? And there is Botes right there. So to kind of give you clarity on that. All right, this is what's interesting. A vertical appearance over Jerusalem happens once in every revolution of the earth. And why is this amazing? Because in Hebrew, this constellation is called Atara, meaning the crown of royalty. Why is this amazing? Because that same word, Atara, appears in many scriptures in Hebrew. For example, in Isaiah 28:5, it says, "In that day shall the Lord of hosts be for a crown, Atara, of glory, and for a diadem of beauty unto the residue of his people." So we can make connections with these words from the scripture. I find it interesting because Hebrew does, with its ambiguity, have, if you put a different vowel, you're going to end up with a different word. But this one is crystal clear. There's nothing ambiguous about it. It is a crown. And unlike Greek, which has different types of crowns, this is just mentioning a crown of glory. So we can see there is a connection between the Southern Cross and the Northern Crown. So plainly, the death of Christ our Redeemer is followed by him claiming his rightful triumphant place. The book of Revelation says, "A crown was given unto him." So when Paul wrote, "Wherefore God has highly exalted him, giving a name which is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every tongue should confess, every knee should bow," we can see that the stars are declaring it. We've got every symbol and image pointing to Christ. Unfortunately, many of us, including myself, were blind to this for most of my life. So, you can say, well, it was right there. Why didn't I see it? Because, like me, you didn't see it. But I'm hoping that you'll see it now. We're going to move quickly to the sign of Scorpio. So let me try and find you an enlarged image. And this one is a little bit interesting too. So we'll take this one away for right now. You can see that Scorpio is right here, okay? And we're also going to be talking about this Ophiuchus as part of the decans. Also, as well, you're going to see this gentleman here is holding what is called the serpents. And if you can see, this is where you can't make this stuff up. I want you to take a look at what the serpent is trying to go for. The serpent is trying to go for the royal crown. So again, if you know the Bible, you're going to be saying, yeah, these are biblical topics. They're not mythological in nature. So here we have Scorpion, or Scorpio. And you're going to find something else. You're going to find that we have a lot of serpent-type creatures in here. Serpents, Draco, Scorpion. There's a couple of them. Here is the serpent holder. Okay, I'll start with those, and as I talk about them, I'll bring the images up. So, Scorpion or Scorpio. In the Coptic, the name is attached to this Isidis is the word, sorry, Isidis, attack of the enemy, that is Coptic. Oppressive forces for the word scorpion that comes to us from a Proto-Indo-European root of sker, S-K-E-R, to cut. The Spanish alacran, Scorpio from the Arabic el akrab. In the Middle English, this word, Scorpio or scorpion, was used of a treacherous person. And in our zodiac, this creature has its tail lifted up in anger. It also appears to be trying to strike the man that I referred to right here. Here, we'll take the big picture again for a second. So, Scorpion appears to have he wants to be going, it looks like, towards serpents and towards the man. Could be that the tail is poised to sting the man. But I want you to take a look at something real quick to give you an idea of why I said there's a lot of images here of snakes, dragons, okay? So you've got serpents right here. You have Hydra. By the way, I've been to Hydra. All right, never mind. It's an island in the Mediterranean. Okay, here we have, there's another kind of serpentine-looking figure over here. As I said, the scorpion, and then right in the middle, Draco the dragon. So it's kind of interesting. All of this imagery, if you were to kind of look back in antiquity, we don't have the same understanding of snakes that those in antiquity did. So it's kind of interesting that there's a lot of that meshed in there. And I don't think it's a coincidence when I say that this, which tells us about the gospel and the stars, was also usurped by the usurper to make it all about more divination and the storytelling of your horoscope rather than the true understanding of what this is supposed to represent. Now, I'm going to ask the question here, who is in mortal combat with serpents? If you kind of look, he's holding the snake. And then there's something else going on here. His foot is lifted up like it's about to crush the head. Look where his foot ends up, okay? And one foot is lifted up, one foot looks like it's in the stomping mode. And he's, as I said, holding this serpent, which is trying to attack the royal crown, the corona borealis. Sorry, it's a little cut and paste here. I haven't grown a screen on top of my head so you could just be looking at me all the time, right? No, all right. The Mayas called this the sign of death or the death god. Scorpio was also sometimes known as the lawless one. In Hebrew, lesath, meaning the perverse one, and just so happens, take a look at what's written on the tail right there, lesath. That is the Hebrew word for what I just said, right there connected to the tail of Scorpion, the lawless one. Some very interesting names attached to these things. All right, so in the Hebrew zodiac, because we have Arabic zodiac, we have Hebrew zodiac, we've got different, they all come together more or less the same. There are some names that are spelt slightly different, but they're pretty much all the same. Here's what's interesting. In the Hebrew zodiac, the sign associated, this would be, by the way, the sign associated with the tribe of Dan. And if you remember, Dan is described as a serpent by the way, and we know that Scorpio is closely, in some ways, they're relating it that way, or to the dragon. How close? Remember, it's signs and symbolisms. We're not looking at the exact image and saying, yes, I see the connection. We're looking for signs and symbols. Earlier, I mentioned the name, I'm going to try to do this again, Ophiuchus, also known as the serpent holder, holding serpents, the serpent. So we have Ophiuchus, a figure of a mighty warrior wrestling with the serpents, who is trying for the head of the crown. And even more remarkable is this man's holding the serpent with both hands. And I addressed his feet already, so I showed you that. You can see that the image looks like he is getting ready to stomp or crush with the one foot. The Greek name of this constellation of Ophiuchus is from the Hebrew, Aphekus, the serpent held or power restrained. Again, I don't know how you make these things up. The brightest star here appears in the man's head. The Arabic word for this, I think we may have it, it may read on here, in the man's head. Yep, it's right there, but it's very hard to read. It's quite small. I don't know if you can zoom in on that and read that. Can you see that? It's very, very faint. But the Arabic is ras, and you know, if you studied Hebrew with me, resh. It's Arabic and Hebrew, because they're both Semitic languages, are very close in some of the words. So ras is resh, head. Al-Hegi, the head of whom he holds. Also in this constellation, a star called Trophis, meaning tread underfoot. Carnibus, the wounded, and Safe, the bruised one. That's all in this man's foot. And he's doing what? Thank you. Can you now see why I said, I don't know how you could put any other person in all of the pantheon of mother and child stories, how you could put anyone other than Christ, because they are all pointing back to him. He is sacrifice, he is victim, he is conqueror, he alone is victor, he alone is the seed of the woman that will bruise the head of the serpent. That's scripture right there. So it doesn't, you don't have to be a super big biblical genius to kind of get and put all this together. The serpent, or serpents, is trying to take the crown that does not belong to him. That is straight out of Isaiah, where we have the picture of this more than beautiful created creature boasting about all of his splendor and beauty before, when he was in the garden. So, you know, you can kind of put all this together and see it's pretty much telling you the story of the gospel. The last sign within the Scorpio cluster is the sign of Hercules. Now, this one is pretty controversial. And why it's controversial is because I'm going to say some things that, you know, you got to go look this up for yourself and really dig. Don't just go to Wikipedia. You know, I hate that when people say, oh, I looked it up on Wikipedia. Well, if you read Wikipedia, you probably don't want to listen to me, okay? Wikipedia is a platform that anybody can change or alter, can put anything in at any time, and that's what you're going to quote. Okay, so, you know, give me real valid sources with names attached, and then we'll have something to talk about. So the last sign in this cluster is Hercules. Now, in the head of this figure, there's a very bright star. In fact, it's the brightest star in this constellation, which is known in Arabic as Ras al-Ghathi, the head of him who bruises. The name of the adjacent star, the branch kneeling. In antiquity, we find the star was venerated or worshipped as representing a savior. Now, you remember I said to you, the wise men? Well, I'm pretty sure that they were looking at something like this, and I'm pretty sure that they could see the whole gospel laid out in the stars, which is how they followed the star. We'll call it, for right now, the Star of Bethlehem. That could have been just the Lord leading them, because no one else saw the darn star. Figure that one out. It's always like that, right? When it comes to the things of God, only one guy was there. No other witnesses, of course, right? But that's how it goes. That's why it takes faith. So, but what's important about this figure, if you have not studied this subject, there are a lot of people that will argue and say, that's mythology. Well, let me just indulge you for a second, because within mythology, there are kernels of true personages, or we'll call them figures that existed that then became, we'll call them blown out of proportion and deified. And then hence now we have these great gods that emerged out of the sea and out of a volcano and everything else, right? But there are kernels of truth within mythology we have to look at. So the Greeks were asked to explain who is the person being represented here as Hercules? They didn't truly understand or know who Hercules actually was. He was to them a god who realized incredible and formidable acts of power. But we can be certain of one thing. When we start mining this, either Hercules or Heracles, we find that there is definitely a biblical connection. I've said this before. It's not the first time I've said this. Some have said that Hercules from mythology is none other than Samson of the Bible. Now, in this case, we were looking at something completely different. Let me see if I have a black and white of our, yeah. So if you remember, let me get these other guys out of the way too. If you remember, there is the Arabic for Ras al-Hagus. We have Ras al-Gethi, which I just talked about, that star right there. But I want you to take a look at something. So here's another image of snakes. Here he's holding something that has 3 heads and something that looks like he's about to club them, all right? So this image is a little bit different in its interpretation, if you will. I'm going to probably have to come back and elaborate more on this because there's a lot more within this subject to talk about. But just as we're looking at it, remember I'm telling you signs and symbols, it's important not to get caught up in the mythological understanding. But if you want to go there, as I said, find the sources, and you will find that in antiquity they were discussing that this has to be a figure that many, by about the 1st or 2nd century, were attaching this to the figure of God. Now, I can't speak on that because that is definitely, we'll call it speculative, but within the imagery, it is someone who has the power over this 3-headed creature. And we're going to leave that one right now because I do need to come back to it, and I can see in my notes I've got some more things to say on this. But let me jump to something else, which is we know that Christ as the God-begotten, well, I shouldn't say it like that, all man, all God, the dual nature. He is known as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the conqueror, the coming king. But make no mistake, who will slay the dragon? And this is the thing that I want to talk about. Who will bring about restoration through reconciliation? And it's only those who trust his finished work. So again, if we're looking to this, we can kind of see imagery here of overcoming many times over. The man holding serpents, who has some control, who is about to bruise the head of Scorpio, and Hercules or Heracles with his club in hand holding to this 3-headed creature. Now, some have said, and I'm not going to say this, but some have said the 3-headed creature represents the 3 dimensions. You know, if you want to talk about the end times, the beast, the false prophet, the Antichrist, I don't think it represents that, but some have put that out there. Okay, so we've got a lot of stuff that's put out there as signs in the sky that no man or woman could have altered, right? It's up there. We can't take a star from one place and put it in another and say, see, it's in the wrong place. So how it is the way it appears. There is no mythological figure that depicts power, victory, and strength, such as Hercules or Heracles, but there's also no other person in history that has been talked about in the way we understand, not in a mythological way, but out of the book. You could say, well, Moses was talked to as a great man of power and leader, but he didn't perform and do the miracles and the acts that Jesus did. So here, this may be a very weak area of connection, but we still have to mine it because it's there. There will be many attempts to rid the earth of Christ. And that's why you have a lot of commingled figures here. The figures, we'll call them of evil, versus the figure of the conqueror or the victor. And if you start really looking at this, from the edict of Herod to slaughter all male children 2 years and under, to the temptation of Christ by the devil, throw yourself down, you'll receive everything at my word, just do it, basically an attempt for him to kill himself. And of course, and ultimately the final straw here, the religious leaders of Christ's day. So you can see there were so many attempts to rid the earth that if we're looking at this, some might say, well, this is just a depiction of a cosmic battle where forces are duking it out in the constellations. But I think once we finish going through the zodiac, I think we will find that there's much more connection to the Bible than mythological understanding. There are two more points I'd like to address here. One is the lira, or the lyre, or the harp, and the other one is the ara, the altar, because they are the Dickens to the north and the south of the figure that we are looking at. So, okay, I'm going to try and find this in my notes because I've just jumped ahead. So we are going to look at Sagittarius. Forgive me for this choppiness. We are going to look at Sagittarius right here because these will be attached to Sagittarius. So Sagittarius, as you can see, we've got another dual-natured figure, horse body, man head, with bow and arrow pulled back, the bow and arrow basically ready and aimed at. What is it aimed at? Scorpio. I don't know. Now here's the error. If you do read any of these books or any information, most of these people will make an error and say that they'll identify the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the man on the white horse, as analogous and the same as this, but it's not. That's an error of interpretation and understanding, because the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the one that we're looking at as the man on the horse carrying a bow with no arrow, that's not the image of Christ. So just kind of park that for a second. If you have any of those books that read that, I'm sorry, but that can't be, because if that was so, we would not have the arrow pointed at destroying Scorpion. So it just, in interpretation, if you're going to keep within all the symbolic nature of this, you have to stay consistent. So we have, again, the double-natured seed of the woman, son of God, who is also son of man in the Hebrew tradition. And looking at him, he's not that much different from Centaur, really. The piercer, the Greeks called him, Chiron, the righteous dealing one. And according to Greek tradition, Chiron was the great teacher of mankind. His knowledge spanned arts, music, medicine. The arrows he carries, of course, are aimed at, supposedly, the heart of Scorpion. I don't know if it's aimed at the heart, but it's certainly aimed in that direction. Chiron is at times seen occupying the throne of Apollo. Now you can get into this and it gets a bit blurry, but if you line it up, you look at the book of Revelation, we read about the King of Kings and Lord of Lords put down the final conflict of the beast, the false prophet, along with all those who accompany him. So we have some concept that's attached. Again, some of these are difficult because it's not like we have a whole definition. There are signs and symbols which we must extrapolate from. So you're not going to get every single point with clarity. But the lyre, or the lyre, the harp, has another star in it. That star is known as Vega. And the meaning of this star is he shall be exalted. All right. It's placed in the first decans of Sagittarius and connects to joy, gladness, praise, and worship. If you go to the Bible, you can definitely see that this was an instrument mentioned many, many times, usually associated with joy and worship. Okay, we have two more signs to cover, and then I'm going to wrap this up. So, in the decans of Sagittarius, the Ara, or the burning pyre. Ara, right there. And here, I'm going to flip this upside down for a minute so you can actually see the flames are that way, right? It's just upside down. I don't know. Okay, so in Arabic, that is called al-mugamara, the finisher, or the one who completes, or the one who is making an end of what was required or needed to be done. Latin, this is called ara, from where we ultimately get altar. Also, funeral pyre comes from this image. Most charts, this is symbolized as a burning fire on an altar. And I think maybe next week I will come back to this and start here, because I'm really now just giving you very brief pieces of information, and we need to dig a little bit deeper. But to bring us to the final part of Sagittarius, we would go to the image of Draco, the dragon. So Draco, we find Draco, did I turn this upside down? We find Draco right here, and you've got all this twisty-turny right here, which when we put all this together, then you have to look at what is going on. Right now I'm just explaining to you the images, but what is going on. So interesting that this sign, usually most interpret this sign as the sign of the evil one, the cunning one, the deceiver, the liar, subtle. If you weren't a biblical person and had no scriptural knowledge, but you were trying to learn the Bible, I think you could adequately say that this describes most of the characteristics that we read about of Satan in the Bible through and through. The serpent is the sly, slow one, poised to be the klepto of souls, okay? So the serpent and Draco, the dragon, are the same, but they appear differently. And this is what the deceiver does. He can change his form. He can appear as an angel of light. Various forms of manifestation, various forms of evil. And even in the Bible, he is described in different ways. Father of lies, the deceiver of the brethren. You've got a whole bunch of different names. I don't think it's an oddity that we see different images that are representational of the same one. So we have Sagittarius that goes to war against the enemy, and it would be difficult to, again, describe or define this sign in any other way than the final fall of Draco the dragon before the unstoppable arrows of the seed of the woman. And if you know your Bible, I want you to just take a look at this. There's a lot going on here, but the key thing that I want you to look at, I'm going to have to turn this upside down for you. Sorry about that. Otherwise, you'll all be on your heads. So take a look. Here is Hercules. Now that you're looking, he's got this three-headed snake in his hand, the club over here, but look at what's right beneath him. And now, again, look where his foot is, right on top of the serpent. So I think it's very interesting. John wrote in Revelation saying that he beheld a great dragon, a red dragon, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon his head 7 diadems, whose tail was drawing along 1/3 of the stars of heaven, of the heavens. I think it's interesting, if you're going to go back and forth in and out of the Bible, to see he stood before the woman he was desiring to devour her child, but as soon as it was brought forth, the child was caught away to the Father above the throne. So it's almost like if you're looking at this, you can see each image or each sign is telling a dimension or a foci of the whole message that is unfolded from beginning to end. If we start with the seed of the woman, we have to end with the ultimate end of the serpent or the dragon, or if you want to call it just who he is, Satan. So Draco the dragon in this constellation carries the name of the one trodden underfoot. Mythology says the dragon guarded the golden fruit. This is why I told you. Pay attention to mythology, because there are extrapolations from things. They're not just a creation or a figment of one individual's creation. This has to come from streams of what we call from some ancient time. Because it says here, Draco the dragon guarded the golden fruit in the famous garden of Hesperides. Interesting. Stopping those who would desire to eat them. Well, the twist in this plot is that no, he actually wanted them to eat it, if you want to put it that way. So it's strangely similar in some ways to the Bible, and that's why I said we have to be careful, because some people would just completely discount the mythology and say, oh, we're not going to read that. But if there are kernels of truth in there that we trace back to a single origin source, I'm going to pay attention. So if you know what happened in Genesis, we're kind of looking at an unfolding depiction. Hercules is the sign in the stars of the promised seed of the woman, supposedly the one to come, the despised, the rejected, but also the serpent bruiser, and ultimately the destroyer of Satan. So, if you're looking at all this and all of these images, it is quite peculiar. let me turn this back this way again. It is quite peculiar that thus far in all of the imagery, we could probably weave together, and I might do this for you next week, so line by line, to describe each element as it connects to the Bible for each zodiac sign and its north and south decans. But what I'm wanting to do here is, this is not a study on learning everything that's in the sky. It's a study on trying to show ultimately, when we go through the stars completely, the 12 zodiac signs, we uncover something. Everything is a reference back to the seed of the woman, to the Son of Man, to the Son of God. All of these are. There is no accidents, you can say, but again, some people will make the argument these look like mythological figures, or these were maybe done in antiquity. But yeah, they were done in antiquity. This is the mystery of it all, that we in modern times can mess around with things and reorganize. We can Photoshop, we can edit, we can use AI and do all kinds of crazy things, but you can't alter the stars. We're trying to show whether Jesus lived. You say to me, well, that's quite a stretch. Now, you're going to be in the stars and you want that to be proof that Jesus lived? No, I want you to look at the whole unfolding of Christ's life in the stars, and then come back and tell me that God didn't have a plan before the foundations of the world, that God didn't have a plan. It just wasn't an afterthought in the garden, but God, in his infinite wisdom. You know, some people don't really understand. That's why I said you need to study the Bible. You need to read this book. Because some people will say, well, I heard somebody say online the other day that Jesus became God. Huh? This is the type of theological error that, and I'm seeing it all around me. But if you're really reading this book and you know the book, you're going to look at this map with all of its constellations, and you'll say, yeah, okay, some of it might be a stretch, but when you step back and you look at the big picture, none of it's a stretch, and it can't be, or it's all just a happy coincidence. You know, it's like the person that says, well, I don't believe that God could have made this in such a way and designed it to tell this story before the story even took place. Okay, well, this is what I believe. I believe that each and every one of us, while yet before we were in our mother's womb, before he called your name. I know that's jarring, because you're like, that can't be, but he did. And that's why you're listening. And then there's a whole sea of people out there who don't care. Their names were not called. Their names are not written in the book of life. Pastor, I don't think that's true. Okay, well, you have a right to your opinion, but I'm not asking you to share opinions. I'm actually asking you to read the truth that is in this book and abide by it. So when we unfold this type of stuff, you can say, well, it's a big, long jog to get to where you're going, but I'm going to exhaust this subject enough that the next time somebody asks you, did Jesus really live? You might say something like, oh boy. How much time do you have? That's my message. You've been watching me, Pastor Melissa Scott, live from Glendale, California at Faith Center. If you would like to attend the service with us Sunday morning at 11 a.m., simply call 1-800-338-3030 to receive your pass. If you'd like more teaching and you'd like to go straight to our website, the address is www.pastormelissascott.com.